Yves Latowski, the Chief Economist at Coface, and he'll be doing a presentation on a European overview and sort of the struggling economy in Europe and their recovery so far and an outlook into 2015. If anyone has any questions during the presentation, you can pose those in either the questions or the chat box, and we'll hold them till the end so that we can take all the questions in a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We've also got a survey that we will put at the end of the presentation. If you guys could take that, it's a big help to all of us. We're able to sort of make our presentations better by getting all of your feedback. So with that, I'm going to introduce Yves and let him start the presentation today.
Hello, everybody. I'm Yves Latowski. I'm the chief economist of Coface, the French credit insurer. So I will talk to you about the situation in Europe and all the difficulties we are struggling these days with. Before doing that, I think Justin has a little polling questions for you.
All right, so everyone, we're just going to do a short polling question that will launch the presentation. Everyone should be able to see it on there now. The question is, how knowledgeable are you on the current state of the European economy? The choices we have are no knowledge, limited knowledge, average knowledge, and advanced knowledge. If you guys could just take a few seconds to answer this question, you can just click on whichever answer pertains to you. And then we're going to quickly share the results and then let Yves get started on his presentation. So I'm just going to give it a few more seconds. We have almost everyone has answered. So I'm going to close it and then just share the results. So we have 38% with a limited knowledge of the European economy, 56% with an average knowledge, and 6% with an advanced knowledge. So with that, I'll pass the presentation back to Yves and let him get started.
Thank you. So I hope that after my presentation, normally after the presentation of an economist, everybody realized that nothing was clear, so maybe you will have knowledge at all about the European economy, but that's not my goal, of course. Just maybe I will have a general outlook of the issues in Europe. Then I will deal with some specific countries that I picked up. Let's say the larger economies such as Spain, Germany, France, Italy, UK, and then I will conclude, and then of course we will be able to pose several questions. So of course, one of the issues that we are struggling these days in Europe is about the growth and the fact that we are in a situation of well, it's extremely difficult to describe whether we are in a recovery or whether we are still in crisis. It's quite a question, by the way, and depending on who you talk to, some people will say we are still extremely in a bad situation. Some people said we are out of a crisis. And I think one of the reasons that we are dealing with is that the recovery we are dealing with is extremely painful, extremely slow, and I would say historically slow. If you look at previous recoveries and recession in Europe, but you could say the same about the US, by the way, the speed of the recovery is extremely low. I mean, the number of quarters some of the economies have taken to recover their pre-recession levels have been extremely long. For example, if you take a country like France, but even if you take a country like Italy today, Italy didn't recover with its pre-recession level of GDP. So indeed, this is one of the key questions, that we are much still under the level we were before the crisis. And as you know, in Europe, we've had not only one recession, but two recessions. The question is why? Why do we have such a slow recovery? The first thing that we don't have in Europe is confidence. Here, you see on the left chart here that I took the level of confidence in the manufacturing sector before the crisis, 2002, 2007, and after the crisis. And what you see is that, well, we didn't have much confidence before the crisis, but it's even worse after the crisis. So this is really, and you see that US is a clear exception here. In the US, you have a level of confidence that it's a little better than before the crisis. In Europe, we don't have that. I think that it's linked to the fact that we have been in Europe through exceptional events. And when you are dealing with exceptional events, and I must say that first we've had 2 recessions, a double dip. We've had also something that was absolutely unthinkable in Europe, which was a country would go in sovereign default, of course Greece. It was unthinkable that something would happen within the Eurozone, and because of that, I think because when something absolutely unexpected happens, then of course afterwards the level of confidence is extremely difficult to recover, because it seems that we are in a world where everything is possible. And this is why we are not exactly sure today that such an event cannot begin again, and we are not sure, by the way, that the sovereign issues are completely behind us. So this is why we have things. I think that if you want to speak about a more, let's say, like an economist, I would say that we know that financial crises have a long-term effect on confidence, and I think this is clearly what you see in Europe. Of course, you see that in Greece, where you had some confidence before the crisis and completely loss of confidence after, and you see how deep, in fact, financial crisis would damage confidence for a long term. Another thing that we don't have in Europe is credit. We don't have enough financing of the growth, and you see, of course, typically the case of Spain, for example, where you had a huge credit bubble, huge credit availability before the crisis, and of course a huge credit crunch after the crisis. So typically now we don't have one very important engine of growth, which is of course financing. But even in a country where I don't say you have a credit crunch, like France, for example, you've had much more credit before the crisis than after. You still have some credit available, as you see, the 1% growth of credit to corporates year-on-year after the crisis, the green line. This is the chart on the right, and you see before the crisis 5%. So in every country that you would pick, and even in the US, by the way, you have less credit than before the crisis. And I think this is also why we have such a difficult recovery, is that, of course, the financing is lacking. You will have countries which are in a deep banking crisis, and during a deep banking crisis like Spain, or a deep credit crunch like Italy, or you will have countries which have banks that are rather survived, like Germany or France, are rather in a, let's say, okay shape, but of course the credit is not here. So the consequence on all that is that what we have to deal with now in Europe is not that we do not have growth, it's that we have a very low growth, and perhaps for a certain number of years. This is also one very important issue for our clients, is that we need to deal with lower growth for a long time. And you see this left graph where you have average growth before the crisis, the forecast of the IMF for the year 2014-2019, and you see that everywhere, and by the way, including the US, but also, of course, the Euro area, we have lost something like 0.7 points of GDP in terms of growth. And so that may be normal for countries like Greece or Spain, which have endured, I would say, a sovereign bubble in Greece, a private debt bubble in Spain. But even in countries where you do not have really bubbles, like Italy or France, where also you see that we are entering a much lower growth environment. This has 2 consequences. The first consequence, I think this is extremely important for Europe, is the return of the political risk. What I mean by that? Well, if you look today, if we would do a poll in France today for the presidential election, the first party is the Front National in French. The National Front is an extreme right party, and this is, let's say, an anti-establishment, protectionist, let's say, anti-everything, anti-immigration party. So extreme right, and this is not a marginal party anymore. This is when you have a polling today, the head of the National Front is number 1. If you took Spain, the number 1 party today is an extreme left party called Podemos, a party that has just been created some years ago, and this party is run by a young professor of political science, extreme left, so really, again, anti-establishment, anti-Europe, and so on. And clearly you have now this kind of party who are really number 1. And this is absolutely new, because one of the questions is whether how this party will deal if they might be elected. we are not sure they might be elected, but at least they will have, especially if you talk about France, or if you talk about Italy, or if you talk about Spain, those I would say anti-establishment party will have, I would say, responsibilities in cities, and this is really something that of course can have an impact on the way politics and the way economic decision will be taken in Europe. Another more financial issue is the fact that the left chart, you see the public debt, the sovereign debt of many European countries, long-term prospect for public debt. And of course, this graph is extremely scary. And why is it scary? Because you see that we will have a large public debt for a long time. And here you have the IMF projection. So it means that for a lot of countries in Europe, you will have a very large public debt for around between 90 and 100% of GDP for a long time. Of course, this is extremely important, and you have to realize that our central bank, the ECB, is not at all like the Fed, is not at all like the Bank of Japan. And what I mean by that is that our central bank in Europe is not able to directly buy sovereign debt on the market. They can buy that on the secondary market. There is, by the way, a big project that the central bank will do that more massively. But this project encounters a lot of contestation, especially from German officials and and this is of course a key element, because whether you are in Japan or whether you are in the US, you deal with a very large public debt too. But at least you have a central bank that is able, as we say, to monetize the debt very massively. This is not the case in Europe. It's still a question mark. And because it is a question, this issue of the huge stock of debt is absolutely crucial. So indeed, we have a lot of issues in Europe, as you see, and sovereign, political. I would also talk about the risk of deflation, but maybe we will speak about that during the question issue, okay? And I will directly go back to the outlook. So you see our projection for growth. You see that we are 0.5% this year for the Eurozone, 1.3%. So you see that it's an extremely low growth. It's a recovery indeed if you compare 2013, where we are at minus 0.4, but it's extremely low, especially compared, for example, to the US. We have really a very low growth. And again, this carries a lot of risks, political and financial risks. And look at countries where growth is still negative, such as Italy, extremely weak, such as France, or a little bit better, like Germany, but still a growth that is under 2%. So this is clearly, and you have one exception, but one exception that is not in the Eurozone so far, and doesn't seem to be very likely to go, which is the UK, but we'll come back to the UK. So the first country that I would like to speak with you is Spain. As I already mentioned, the political issues in Spain. Nevertheless, despite the political uncertainty that we face in Spain and the lack of popularity of, I would say, the traditional parties in Spain, we see a real recovery. And why? Because Spanish people have endured a terrible crisis. A crisis that looks very much like the US in a way. It was a real estate bubble, too much credit, too much finance, and suddenly, of course, the burst of the bubble. The price to pay has been absolutely terrible. There has been a very, very tough recession, as you see on the graph, on the left graph, and sometimes the growth in Spain reached minus 4% in 2009. But after, again, you've had 2 years of recession, 2012, 2013, extremely, again, strong recession. But what has been amazing in Spain is that they've done their homework, meaning that because the crisis has been so terrible, they had to adjust, and the adjustment has been very, very hard, and through a decrease of the cost of labor. You have seen a huge decrease of cost of labor, which has improved the competitiveness of Spanish products. And as you see in 2011 and 2012, the positive, let's say, yellow bar, is export. Export has been starting to drive growth, a very strong export momentum. The most dynamic export country in Europe has been Spain, even more than Germany, because suddenly, again, the Spanish products have been competitive in emerging markets, in Maghreb, in China, in Latin America, but also Spain has gained market share in Germany, in France. And what you see is that this export momentum has now led to domestic demand momentum. Now you see more dynamic positive consumption and positive investment at last. And it's extremely important because I would say the cycle of the recovery, which has started by the supply side, by the improvement in the financial situation of the corporates, has now led to stronger domestic demand. And this is why we are now, seeing that the growth in Spain has been stronger. Of course, there are lots of question marks in Spain, huge unemployment, still a lot of political issues, a kind of reform fatigue by the Spanish people after the terrible years they've had. But I would say that at least if you look at the corporate side in Spain, it has improved tremendously, and you see, and I hope you see it in the right chart, the fact that the bankruptcies in Spain has decreased now quite steadily, and our payment experience as a credit insurer has improved for the last 1 year quite steadily too. So we are, I think, much more positive now in the Spanish case. Another country where we are very positive is Germany. There have been a lot of worries about Germany in the late months, saying that Germany doesn't invest enough, Germany is too slow, Germany doesn't play its role of a locomotive block. Of course, I'm French, and French, they are very, very happy when they're able to bash some Germany. Why? Because Germany is always a great example that we should follow. So in a way, but I think that we shouldn't be too happy because Germany is still extremely strong. And I think, of course, it's a good thing because also Germany has done the reform that Spanish has done recently, not exactly the same, but in the 90s. But what we see for the German growth is that indeed the German growth is volatile. It's a fragile growth. Why? Because Germany is an open economy, extremely sensitive to external environment. And of course, Germans have been extremely impacted by the situation in Russia, geopolitical crisis. And you see when you look at the confidence of the manufacturing sector in Germany, it has been extremely impacted by the crisis. It's true. And historically, it's true that the German growth has always been touched by external environment because it's always been an export-led economy. But what we see, and you see that on the left chart, which is looking at the contribution of growth historically, you see that historically the orange line, the consumption has been a weak supporter of growth traditionally in Germany. Germans did not so much consume if you look at households. But what you see is that year to year, the weight of consumption in the growth regime in Germany is improving. And now, more and more, because of low unemployment, because of increasing wages, the German consumer is more and more present in growth. And it is very important because when Germany now has an external shock, it can, in a way, withhold this shock because it has a more solid basis with the consumption. And we have seen that, by the way. Recently, everybody was saying, oh my God, Germany is going to be in recession. No, in fact, Germany has avoided recession in the third quarter. Yes, export didn't do well in Germany because of the external environment, but consumption has been positive. And finally, the growth has been feeble, but has been positive. So, in a way, Germany can now, I would say, counter-shock those external events by stronger consumption. It is a very good thing, and it is also a very good micro news because you see that the bankruptcies, insolvencies on the right chart, the green line. We have something like 27,000 bankruptcies in Germany today. Sorry, I'm trying to. 24,000 bankruptcy today, a little more than 24,000. You see that the green line is decreasing. This is very important. You see also that the blue line, which is the cost of bankruptcies, meaning the debt to supplier of the bankrupt company, is also now decreasing. Just increasing a bit recently, but it's not a movement that we are worried about. What we see on this green line is that clearly the German corporates have been stronger. And one of the big drivers of bankruptcies in Germany has been low consumption. And what we have seen, the fragile sectors have been always the retail because they were, of course, confronted with a very not dynamic consumption. And now that consumption is reviving, we do not see the kind of bankruptcy we have seen with Schlecker, with Karstadt, which are the big players that are going bankrupt in Germany. Remember this number, something like 25,000 insolvencies per year in Germany, and you will see the numbers for France. And remember that France and Germany have almost the same number of corporates. So looking at France, no, of course, this is not the same picture. So again, 25,000 bankruptcies in Germany, 63,000 bankruptcies in France. You see, this is not the same dynamic. Indeed, companies are really suffering in France. And what has been absolutely terrible is that you see that 2009 recession in France, 63,000 bankruptcies. Today we do not have a recession, we have stagnation in France, but more than the record in 2009. So there is something happening in the supply side which is absolutely terrible. And indeed, the French corporates suffer. They suffer why? They suffer because the cost of labor, I talked about the cost of labor in Spain, which has been decreasing. This has been the complete opposite in France. During the crisis, we have seen cost of labor increasing, almost increasing at the same pace as Germany. Germany is normal. Germany, they have done their homework during the 90s. We didn't do that in France. We didn't do the supply side reform. And now, of course, corporates do pay the price. They pay the price because we see corporate margin shrinking in France in the last 5 years extremely quickly. And so very vulnerable corporates, financially vulnerable, facing, of course, a difficult macro environment. And of course, the good point about France, and you still see what's striking in the numbers, when you look at the macro numbers in France, it's still striking, is that consumption is still positive in France. It's very rare that you have negative consumption in France. It has always been the strong point of the growth in France. It has always saved French growth, but it's weakening. You see that the contribution of consumption is weakening. It was traditionally 1 point during 2000 to 2008. In 2013, it's been 0.2. It's going to be 0.1 in 2014. So consumer is still here, but it's extremely weak. Why is it weak? Because, of course, the French consumer is more and more prudent, very high unemployment, very difficult political situation. This is why the French consumer are very reluctant. And, of course, the indicators of supply side are extremely weak. Export side is extremely weak because of very difficult competitiveness. Investment has been negative and is still negative in France. So there is a very strong lack of confidence from the corporate side. And this is why, by the way, insolvencies are so high, because insolvencies in France are extremely dependent on consumption. Consumption is weak. This is why insolvencies stay at a very high level. So clearly, the French government today is trying to tackling the supply side aspect. It's not supposed to be a priority. We do not see really the concrete result, and this is why now we are a bit worried about the French situation, which is clearly stagnating. Italy has really very bad macro numbers. I mean, we don't see still the recovery. It's even worse than France because it's still negative. The domestic demand, and traditionally Italy has been a much weaker country than other elements. But you see the problem on the right. I talked about the unit labor cost. You see the steady increase of France, 12%, the steady increase of Germany, normal, they can afford it. But when you see the highest number is for Italy. Cost of labor has been increased. There is a big issue of cost competitiveness in Italy. But I would be, on the short term, things are difficult for Italy. On the longer term, I would say that the reform momentum in Italy is stronger than in France. We see that with the new Prime Minister, Mr. Renzi, a lot of things are starting to happen. There have been several Prime Ministers recently who have been very pro-reform, labor market, the big payment of the claims from the government. You know, the government has huge arrears to the corporate sector and is now starting to pay its arrears. And political reforms also to make the country more stable is also one of the priorities of Mr. Renzi. So clearly the new Prime Minister is trying really to improve the momentum. If he succeeds, Italy has a lot of strength, especially with its corporate sector. Of course, it will take time to take effect, to take macro effect, and for the moment we just see the negative, in the context where Italy has something that France doesn't have, a credit crunch. Italian corporates do have a terrible credit crunch. The banks in Italy are cleaning their portfolio very violently, and this is also increasing clearly the contraction of investment in Italy. Finally, I will deal with the UK, the United Kingdom. Extraordinary growth. I mean, the numbers are amazing. And when you look at the forecast for investment, you are dealing now with huge number. And it's quite amazing for this country. So 2.7, 2.1, we are not afraid about the prospect of rising interest rates in the UK. On the short term, I would say it's extremely strong. And it's extremely strong because the British politics has been really amazingly pragmatic. What they have done is first, they have done in 2012 until mid-2013, trying to target the recovery of consumption. And of course, at the expense of having almost a real estate bubble. But now, what they are doing is that they are really boosting investment through a lot of measures to help corporates, and it's really biting. If you look at the right chart, you understand why. Of course, the investment is extremely dynamic because it comes from a very low base. There have been a lot of disinvestment in the recent years, and investment has been extremely weak in the UK. So this is why, in a way, it's easier for them to invest, but at least on the short term, it's a huge driver for growth. I would say also that the very strong point of the UK is that you have a central bank that is extremely pragmatic, that has been extremely present on the sovereign debt market. So unlike what I talked about the ECB, the Bank of England has been of course, alleviating all the problem of sovereignty. So in a way, if you compare some macro data of France and UK, it's a bit unfair because when you look at the budget deficit, when you look at the current account deficit, is not much better than France, but they have allowed themselves to have a much more pragmatic macro policy, which has results. So, Coface, maybe I will not have the time to talk about Russia because, of course, it's behind the picture indeed today in Europe, but I'm waiting for your question. I just wanted to tell you that Coface has a country risk assessment. We are looking at the corporate payment risk, default risk in a given economy on average. To do that, we use our payment experience, we use our macro forecast, and we use the business climate, and then it's 7 grades, A1, A2, A3, A4, B, C, D. So 7 grades, A1 the best. What can we say about mostly advanced economy and Europe? We are now clearly, since I would say 2013, 2012, in a situation rather of upgrade. It has really started, I would say, in June 2013. You see that Germany is an A1 country. Remember that we are really looking at the corporate risk here, and again, German corporates are extremely strong, very low debt, very high profitability, a very low dependency on credit. So this is why, of course, German corporates are strong, and you have seen the insolvencies dynamic, which is very good. We have recently improved the assessment of 3 countries, Spain, as I told you, A4, an upgrade. A positive watch on Belgium and Netherlands because of strong exports, strong investment, decreasing bankruptcies also in those 2 countries. So you see that things are getting slowly better. Of course, there are lots of question marks on a lot of economies, like Italy, like France, like Portugal, like Greece, which I would say stable. I wouldn't say the risk is deteriorating, but at least for the moment, it's not improving. I think I've finished my speech here, and I would be happy to listen to your questions.
So if anyone does have any questions, you guys can feel free to put those in the question or the chat function, and I will pose them to Yves. So with that, we'll probably take about 10 to 15 minutes of questions as long as there are questions coming in. All right, I'm not seeing any questions coming in. So, Yves, do you want to sort of give us a couple of, one or two big takeaways that you think would be good for everyone here to have, either on sort of the current state of Europe in general or what you see in the future for Europe?
Just maybe one element, of course, is Russia, which is a huge topic these days. I'm trying to move my, but it doesn't move today. I don't know why. My slide. Yes, it does. So one question is about the Russian situation and its impact on Europe. But what you see first is that for large Western European economies is that Russia stagnating, Russia having the ruble falling very, very strongly, it doesn't have a huge direct impact because, as you see, it's 3% of German exports, a good 2% of French exports, so it's not such a huge partner. Of course, some very important French and German corporates are present in the Russian market. And they are, of course, now asking themselves a lot of questions about investing or selling, but it's not, I would say, on a macroeconomic point of view, it doesn't have a clear impact. Now, of course, the political situation is getting worse, and geopolitical, I would say, dynamic is not very positive. Two elements to watch. The first one is that the Russian corporates have a very large debt towards European banks. One of the questions is that, for example, we have a debt service of $32 billion only in December this year, so this month, something like $130 billion for the year to come to pay from Russian banks and Russian corporates to, I would say, mostly European banks, but not only, also US banks. So of course this is to watch because of the falling ruble, because of the stagnating activity in Russia, because also of the dynamic of sanctions, those corporates may have trouble to pay. And this is also one of the question marks. Second element, of course, is the gas. Of course, as you know, Europe is extremely gas dependent on Russia. Will Russia cut the gas? I don't think so, or unless I would say, if I'm in the head of Mr. Putin, I wouldn't do that. I don't think it's a good idea. But of course, I would say the political dynamic can lead to certain decisions that are not economically rational, but they have other rationalities, I would say. I think that as far as I would say Germany or France are concerned, I guess there are a lot of gas reserves there here. One of the problems would be mostly for Eastern Europe, which is much more gas dependent on Russia. Look at the right chart, Baltics in Bulgaria, Hungary are extremely gas dependent on Russia, and here then the European solidarity will be challenged, because then if the Bulgarians ask the Germans, can you give us some gas? Sorry guys, the gas is for us, it's not for you for the moment, because we don't know where it's going. So that can be one of the big issues on the whole. So clearly, I mean, the situation is extremely threatening. The second big question these days is deflation. As you know, we are dealing with a very, very low inflation. Low inflation is not deflation. We are having now something like 0.3, 0.4, depending on the month. It's extremely low, and there is a big fear that we go into deflation, meaning negative growth of the overall prices in Europe. We have some countries that are in deflation these days. Some members of the Eurozone, mostly Greece and Spain, we have indeed prices that are decreasing. For the moment, we have only low inflation in most of Europe. This is an issue because, of course, if you get into deflation, it's a big trap. It's a big trap because it's extremely difficult to get out of that. And because, in a way, when you are in deflation, what's happening is that consumers expect more price decrease, so they hold their demand. They don't buy anything, and of course, by not buying anything, price continues to decrease, and there is a vicious circle that is also there. Another big problem is that, as I said, there is a huge public debt in Europe, but there is also a huge private debt in some countries, especially in Spain, in Portugal, in Greece. We are dealing with huge corporate and consumer debt. And of course, when there is deflation, the real value of your stock of debt is increasing. And this is also, so it makes the leveraging process extremely complicated. what we are still feeling that we are not going to deal with deflation. We are going to deal with low inflation in Europe for several reasons. One of the reasons being that wages are still increasing, and especially in the two main economies, which are Germany and France. We still see positive growth of wages, and this is normally one good element to avoid deflation. Another very important element that should help us to avoid deflation is the role of the central bank. I told you that the ECB is extremely limited in its mandate. They cannot do as the Fed does, as the BOE does. There is a lot of limitations. But Mr. Draghi, the head of the ECB, is trying to do a lot. He's communicating a lot. He's repeating constantly that he's here to help, that he will do anything to save the Eurozone. He's inventing, he makes a lot of innovations in terms of monetary policy to show that the central bank is here and present and to avoid the deflation trap. So I think the central bank, wages, I think it should help us to avoid deflation.
We have a couple of questions that came in here while you were speaking. So one of the questions is, what is your forecast of the euro/US dollar exchange rate for the next 12 months?
Well, my answer could be I don't do forecast, but of course it's not an answer. Well, I don't do exchange rate forecast. This is what I'm doing. I'm not a banker, so at least I'm not paid to do that. But more seriously, I don't expect the euro to fall much more. Of course, there are many driving forces to see the euro falling, but I don't think it should go under 120, or the range of 120, 134. And I think that is where the euro will stay. Why? Of course, when you look at the growth differential, clearly the euro should fall. US is clearly much more dynamic than Europe, and the more the months are coming, the more the pure it gets. So the growth in the US is extremely strong compared to Europe. The second element, of course, is monetary policy, and it's key. Now we are clearly awaiting the hike of interest rates in the US, and we are of course certainly not going into this direction in Europe, where we are still going to have a very, very accommodative policy. We are preparing a QE in Europe, hopefully a large one. So clearly we are in the difference of cycles in terms of monetary policy is also playing for the fall of the euro. This is true. Nevertheless, as far as the US is concerned, I think the US monetary policy will be extremely prudent. And as far as I understand the words of Mrs. Yellen, the hike of interest rates should maybe a little later than expected because she's still not sure seeing the US labor market that it is completely fixed. This is why I'm a little more prudent about the fact that the US monetary policy will be that rapid. But even if you don't take those two elements, there is something that people don't talk too much, and this is, I think, key for exchange rate, and this is key for long-term exchange rate. Monetary policies are very important for short-term exchange rate, but if you look at the long-term trend, you have to look at the balance of payment, the current account. And the current account surplus of Europe is huge. It's absolutely huge now, because you have still very, very strong current accounts from Germany, but now you have almost all the countries who are on surpluses. Look at Spain, look at Italy, look at Austria, and so on. So there has to be the only country which is in deficit is France, unfortunately. So the fact that the aggregated Eurozone is huge, while the current account deficit in the US is still quite big. And so you don't see a decrease of the current account deficit in the US, you see a very strong current account surplus, and this is why I guess there is still pressure to maintain the euro at a certain level because of this balance of payments.
All right, we have a couple more questions here. What will be the impact of the price of Brent oil on the EU?
It's good news, and it's clearly a very, very good news. Well, we expect, for example, that in France, we generally believe that, let's say, 10% brings 0.1, 0.2 points of GDP, all things being equal. This is a good news because, especially in countries like France or like Italy, we desperately need decreasing the costs of the corporates. And thanks to the fall of the euro, recent fall of the euro, plus the decrease of the price of oil, it's a good time, and it's a very, very good news for French and Italian corporates. So it's a good news. Nevertheless, I think the process of the fall of the, I'm a little bit like I don't think that the fall of the oil is not going to be, I guess, that big. I mean, it has been that big. We are 30% now since the spring, but decreased. But I guess that it's not going to last that long. What I mean is that behind, I believe, but that's something that has to be discussed. Behind this, you have a very strong view of Saudi Arabia with trying to, let's say, make some projects, especially in the US, but also in Russia, less economically viable. And I would say with the 60 to 70 USD the barrel, you would have those shale projects in some states of the US or in some in Russia, but in the Arctic Sea, less viable. And then, of course, then the GCC countries like Saudi Arabia will be able to keep their market share and dominance on the oil market. That's why I think they will allow a certain fall, but not that far. So I think it's a good news for Europe. I think it will help Europe at least to still maintain a positive growth, and we are going to be to this 1%. But I don't think you have to expect too much, neither on the euro, neither on the oil price. I think because the big question for growth in Europe is about structural reforms. And you do not want to count only on external aspects such as the euro or the oil price. I mean, if we don't do in Spain, in Italy, in France, those structural reforms on the labor market, on the supply side, on the lower costs, then we won't have growth. Or at least we'll have very low growth.
Okay. Is there a single driver that you think could positively affect all of the countries of Europe, and if so, what would it be?
Well, that's a very good question, because one of the issues is that now European countries need different things, and this is why, in a way, the answer to the question is no. What Germany needs today, which is a little more investment, maybe a little more, let's say, a little strict budget policies, is certainly not what France or Italy need right now. So one of the issues is certainly that the situation in Europe are extremely different. You have very different groups of countries, and this is why, by the way, you need to make a unique monetary policy for so many different countries. But I guess that one thing that we should bring in Europe is a little more coordination. Now today, we have only monetary policy. Fiscal policy is still extremely different and unique for countries. It's a good thing in a way, because it's a big question of sovereignty and autonomy. But then, of course, it's not very, very good as far as coordination is concerned. And in a way, the relaunching, the restarting of the European project is really needed to also boost something that was so important, which was confidence, and which is lacking. I must say that as far as the banking sector is concerned, we have moved with the banking supervision, and I think that's a good thing, but there are lots of other areas, and especially global investment. So as you know, maybe there is a big project for the European Commission on investment. It's still low, but it's a good start, I would say.
Okay. Someone asked if you could give a little more insight onto your feelings of the country of Turkey.
Well, yes, it's a country that I really like a lot, but unfortunately, well, the good news about Turkey, at least, before giving you the bad news, is that when you look at the chart that I just put on the left, is that the landing of Turkey is quite good. I mean, in a way, we are dealing with 3.3%, 3.8. It's you know, before when Turkey was landing, it was crashing at -5. So the good news is that the landing of Turkey is now stabilized, and you have a kind of stable growth around 3 to 4%, which is good. We may have, in terms of growth, a little less volatility than we used to have, and this is maybe the good news. The problem, I would say, is of course the exchange rate. We are dealing with a very, very volatile exchange rate. because of course Turkey has a huge current account deficit. This current account deficit is still financed by hot money. Hot money comes and goes, and of course comes and goes around the decisions of Mrs. Yellen. So in a way, with the Brazilian real, I would say the Turkish lira is one of the most vulnerable currency to the US monetary policies. And I would say the fact that there is a lot of uncertainties from the US monetary policies these days, when will interest rate hike will take place, it's of course not good for Turkey because it means a lot of volatility. And the problem is that you are dealing with a very leveraged corporate sector, extremely leveraged in foreign currency, sometimes short-term. You see on the left the external debt, which is still quite high. So it means that exchange rate volatility, leveraged corporate sector in foreign currency, that's not good. That's not good in terms of corporate risk. And by the way, we've had in the recent period quite sizable number of claims coming from our Turkish experience. And this is why we had to downgrade Turkey. You see it was a B. It was an A4, sorry, negative watch for 6 months, and then we downgraded to B. So for us, the exchange rate issues in a context of political uncertainties, of course, because at the frontier of Turkey there is a lot of things happening. Plus, inside, since the elections, of course, Mr. Erdogan has been quite strongly elected president. But now he wants to change the constitution to make the role of the president a little more powerful. And I guess this move could lead to again some instabilities within Turkey. So outside Turkey there is trouble in the frontier. Inside Turkey you might have trouble soon. So this is why all these cocktails makes us a little bit uncomfortable about the Turkish risk.
All right, and then we also have. In regards to the confidence problem in Europe that you discussed earlier, would you consider the European Union's regulatory environment one of the causes of the confidence problem?
It depends on what you say. I mean, a lot of people say there is too much regulation in Europe. We are regulating, the size of bananas and so on, and so it's crazy. You can look at that way, and you can look at too heavy. How do you say that, intervening too much in too many things, micromanagement and so on. Okay, you can look at it that way, but I come from the background, as you see my name is Polish, and before being here I studied a lot Eastern Europe economy, and I must say that I was amazed how the incredible role that Western Europe has played on Eastern Europe transition and transition to market economies, in Poland, of course, but in many other countries which have access. And in a way, by the way, those regulations that seem so absurd sometimes, they've helped also these countries that are going out of communism, building legal framework, building rules, building institutions, market institutions that are very strong now. And Poland is a very good example of a huge success in that. And so the soft power in Europe is not often mentioned, especially if I talk to a US audience, but it's real. I mean, it's real, and I've seen it really, it's painful, it's slow, it's a long process to join the EU, but it's a very positive process because it helps you to improve your judicial system, your administration, your civil servant. I mean, it can very, very simply, how do you recruit your civil servant? How do you, I mean, it's amazing how it's very well structured and it helps you. So if you look at Turkey, for example, today, of course, it's quite a far removed, but Turkey has been also negotiating with the EU. It's completely stuck now, and it also was a kind of levy to improve some of the part of the legal system in Turkey. So I think there's a lot of positive things about the regulatory environment of Europe that sometimes we forget. And when you come from far from that, it can be quite helpful. It's sometimes heavy, it's sometimes a bit absurd, but it's also kind of sometimes a good reference for other countries.
All right, it looks like that's all the questions that we have, so we're going to shut down the webinar. I'd like to thank both Yves and Coface for taking the time out to present to us today, and I'd like to thank all you guys for taking the time to listen to the presentation. If you do have any questions, you can reach out to me, and I will pass them along to Yves, and he will answer them in as quick a fashion as possible. Also, if you could take the time out, it takes about 30 seconds to take the survey that we have at the end of the presentation as you're exiting. It's a big help to us because we're able to make the webinars better and better serve all of you guys. So with that, we're going to shut down the webinar. Thank you guys again, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.